Once again, we've organized these witnesses according to testimony topic. This morning, we heard about the failure of trust and treaty obligations as it relates to public safety and justice needs and challenges facing schools, K-12, and we heard from the tribal colleges as well. We begin this afternoon's hearing with the last panel related to education before moving to our last topic, tribal government and human services. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly touch on the hearing logistics. We'll call each panel of witnesses to the table, and I thank the first panel for coming up. And each witness will have 5 minutes to present their testimony. Janet will be operating the timer here. When the timer goes to yellow, that means you have 1 minute left of your 5. When it goes to red, and I usually kind of give you an extra minute, but then I'm going to lightly tap the gavel. So that's what it sounds like, because yesterday no one knew what it sounded like because I didn't do it ahead of time. So that's what it sounds like. So you'd be over your time then. We have all of your testimony, and it's all been entered into the committee record here. And so don't feel rushed. Don't feel, like it won't get in unless you say it. I don't anticipate any votes. So we're going to keep this going. So yesterday we had a 45-minute break, and so there were people who stayed an extra 45 minutes. And we appreciated the tribal leaders' patience on that. But so I think we're going to be okay without any votes. If there are votes, I'll ask people to stay close to the witness room. And I'd like to remind members here of the committee rules that prohibit the use of cameras and audio equipment during the hearing by individuals without House-issued press credentials. And Mr. Joyce would like us to start. He'll be here shortly. He wants to be respectful of everybody's time, and I appreciate that, and we work together as a team, so we will get going. In order to save time, rather than do double introductions, I'm going to have you introduce yourself. We won't count that against your time. Once you start your testimony, then Janet will start the 5 minutes. But we found that went a little smoother and kept things moving a little more orderly. So if you would please start, sir.
Anin, bonjour. So when I base in the Shinikazo Jabamana Kazan, the Gizin do them, they do bashing, Mamis Kazaga Galing and do Jaba. Me go chegum, Manungum to be busy that we young, Marke Shikagi, Gitoanga, and Jabang, the Shkuni Ganina. Me go chegum. My name is Darrell G. Siki, Sr., Chairman of Red Lake Band of Chippewa Indians. Good afternoon, Chair McCullum and Ranking Member Joyce and other friends on this committee. Miigwech for this opportunity to testify today on appropriation needs of the Red Lake Band of Chippewa Indians. The Red Lake Band's 840,000-acre reservation is home to more than 13,700 plus tribal members. While we are rich in our culture, language, we face difficulties in meeting the needs of our members with regard to health care, public safety, road maintenance, as a direct result of the government's failure to uphold its trust responsibility, respect our treaties. As you consider fiscal year 2021 appropriations, we ask you to remember the important role you have to play in changing this discourse. Today, we have 5 appropriation requests along with others that can be found in my written testimony. First, Red Lake requests that you continue to protect funding for Indian country from drastic and dangerous proposed cuts by this administration, as you have done for the past several years. Second, we request that you provide advanced funding for BIA and IHS programs to help us avoid painful disruptions to our administration of vital services caused by the uncertainty of continuing resolutions and the government agency shutdowns. Third, we request that you make permanent and expand BIA's Tawahi recidivism reduction initiative. Chair McCullum, you are well aware about the important work that these programs are doing in Minnesota. We have not a youth suicide in over 2 years. We are training our tribal members to get good paying jobs. We are providing our youth with mental health, substance abuse services that are culturally appropriate and effective. we are providing our members with services that they desperately need. Failure to continue increase access to these important programs would not only be disservice to Red Lake, but to all of Indian country. Fourth, as we work to make our reservation safer, free of dangerous drugs that are taking too many of our members' lives, we request additional $20 million in FY 2021 for tribal law enforcement operations, an additional $3 million specifically to combat our opiate crisis. In 2017, Red Lake declared a public health emergency because of the sharp increase in opiate overdoses. Since then, our law enforcement has been successful in confiscating heroin, fentanyl, and other drugs. We also have stepped up training for our members to save lives. In the past 3 years, we had 214 drug overdoses. We're fortunate to have saved the lives of 104 members by using Narcan. At Red Lake, we have actually saved more lives with our Narcan program than all of BIA law enforcement nationwide. Wow. Despite this progress, every year we have to transfer money from other critical unfunded budgets to maintain the level of public safety that our members need. We need you to stand with us in this war on drugs. Our community deserves to be healthy and safe. Fifth, we ask you to add the indefinite appropriations authority language regarding the financing of 105L lease costs that is included in my written testimony. This language is modeled after what has been requested by the administration, adopted by Congress in prior years for contract support costs. At Red Lake, we were pleased to recently finalize Section 105 leases for a criminal justice complex and two new fire halls after our good and productive negotiations with the Department of Interior. We are confident this language would facilitate the funding of lease payments without impacting other tribal programs and would help avoid the time-consuming, costly reprogramming process that frustrates both federal and tribal administrators. And I want to say Chimigwech for allowing me to request your support for some of our most immediate needs at Red Lake as you enact fiscal year 2021 appropriations that directly impact my constituents. We are counting on you. Chimigwech.
No pressure. No pressure from one of my tribal leaders back home. Please, sir.
Suguli swagweka de hasidaze niungyat swagesle wage nugitoloda kale onyota aga dalankwan nage. Hello everyone, my name is Dehasa Hill, Chairman for Oneida Nation. Chairwoman McCollum, ranking members Royce and the committee, thank you for inviting tribal leaders to testify before you today. It is an honor to be here on behalf of more than 17,000 members of the Oneida Nation. I am here today to advocate for a number of critical programs and policies that directly impact the Oneida Nation and Indian country as a whole. As you know, tribes and tribal organizations face many challenges as identified in the Broken Promises report. In addition, both the Indian Health Service and the Bureau of Indian Affairs are on the Government Accountability's Office high risk list. Indian country has been underfunded and underserved for too long. Below are just some recommendations the Oneida Nation has to improve the health, safety, and welfare of our community. One of the fundamental trust responsibilities of the federal government is health care, and the committee has our thanks for the substantial funding increase it provided in the Indian Health Service in the appropriations measure enacted in December. I would like to highlight the growing use of Section 105L leases through which IHS enters into a lease for facilities owned and or leased by tribal organizations and used to deliver the health care services under the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act. Section 105L leases have been a great success, reimbursing tribes for the cost of providing health care facilities that IHS would otherwise have to provide. They provide much needed funds to help with maintenance and improvement of facilities we are providing to carry out our Title V compacts with IHS. Unfortunately, IHS has failed to adequately plan for the widespread adoption of Section 105L leases, and while this committee has increased funding for the program, IHS budget requests have not kept pace with demand. Of the $125 million the committee appropriated in Section 105 leases in December, we understand that at least 95% is needed to support existing leases. In order to address this deficiency, I request the committee take two actions. First, the committee should consider creating a separate funding line for Section 105L leases to ensure the use of the program is fully recognized. Second, the committee should classify Section 105L lease appropriations as separate and indefinite in the manner it did with contract support costs. Next, I would like to reiterate Oneida's strong support for tribal self-governance. This is tribal control and of the distribution and administration of federal funding. At Oneida, we have assumed responsibilities for our healthcare, education, and most BIA programs, and the results have been undeniably positive. Environmental, health, and education indicators have gone up, while administrative costs have gone down. Just as important, our tribal government capacity has also improved. Our staff now have the knowledge, skills, and experience to take on new and more complex governance operations, and they do so on a regular basis. Every culture has a story of how the world was created. Oneida Nation's creation story teaches us that everything is connected. There must be balance for the environment to thrive. It is this philosophy that has let us become long-term partners with the EPA on the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. Launched in 2010, the initiative protects and restores the largest system of fresh surface water in the world, the Great Lakes, which happens to be in our backyard. Since then, Oneida Nation has been awarded nearly $4.5 million for watershed improvement projects, which not just benefit our community, but the greater region. Oneida Nation strongly urges the committee to fully fund the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. Lastly, I ask Congress to fully fund the Native American Languages Program. For more than 80 years, we have worked hard to preserve and revitalize Oneida language. In the 1930s, the Oneida Nation began documenting our language and how it has evolved. In the 1970s, we partnered with a linguist from the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay to develop a dictionary that is in still use today. Unfortunately, our people have not spoken Oneida as a first language for more than a century. To combat this, we've launched a 10-year language immersion plan in 1996 that created the Oneida language curriculum available to hundreds of students. In 2010, thanks to a Native American language preservation and maintenance grant, we developed and implemented an 18-unit course curriculum coupled with an online learning program that has provided Oneida language learning access to thousands of students and Oneida citizens. Oneida language is a key component of our cultural identity. Language is a medicine. When we use Gatnigunguatslio, the good medicine of our language, we begin to heal our students and community. For these reasons, we respectfully request you fully fund the Native American Languages Program at $13 million level. Has just been recently reauthorized with the passage of the Esther Martinez Language Revitalization Act. Yawanko, thank you again for this opportunity.
Oh,
Good afternoon, Chairwoman McCollum.
is the red light on? And would you like some more water than that? We can pour your glass now.
Sure, that would be great.
I can hear it in your voice.
But good afternoon, Chairwoman.
Good afternoon.
Chairwoman McCollum, Ranking Member Joyce, if he was here, and members of the committee. And thank you for your commitment to Indian country and your continued effort to help fulfill the United States trust and treaty obligations. And thank you for inviting me to testify here today. My name is Cheryl Andrews Maltese, and I'm the chairwoman of the Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead-Aquina in Massachusetts on the island of Martha's Vineyard, and I'm currently serving in my 4th term. I also serve on the board of directors of the United South and Eastern Tribes, USET, and the BIA and IHS Self-Governance Advisory Committees, the Tribal Interior Budget Council, and the HHS Secretary's Tribal Advisory Committee. And I also previously served as a senior advisor to the Assistant Secretary on Indian Affairs in the Obama administration. My tribe, the Aquina Wampanoag, is part of the great Wampanoag Nation known as the People of the First Light. We occupied our homeland since time immemorial. Our ancestors were the people who met and helped the Pilgrims survive in these lands, and we were signatories to the original Treaty of Peace between our nation and King James of England. As one of the first Indian nations to encounter European explorers and settlers, we've endured centuries of warfare and disease, legal prohibitions against our culture and language, loss of our Aboriginal homelands, discrimination, and forced assimilation. Indian people have suffered incalculable losses, and we've paid dearly with our lands, our resources, and the lives of our ancestors. So in an effort to end these centuries of slaughter, tribal nations agreed to settle these bloody conflicts with treaties and negotiated settlements with disproportionate concessions from us. Indian country has paid it forward, and I'll repeat that. Indian country has paid it forward. We trusted the United States when they promised that in exchange for our lands and our vast natural resources, that they would in turn provide for the health, education, and well-being of our people. And today, the trust obligation that resulted from those agreements has not been honored. We've honored our end of the bargain. However, the United States has not honored theirs. As this committee understands and tries to address, the United States owes us a financial debt, an obligation to fund the tribal governments to ensure our continued health, education, and well-being. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights report, Broken Promises, describes how grossly inadequate the federal funding is, and it exposes the utter failure of the United States to live up to its trust and treaty obligations, resulting in the devastating impacts across Indian country that this committee is all too familiar with. Federal Indian funding should not be discretionary or subject to political discourse of Congress. This solemn obligation is not discretionary, and Congress's failure to fund the rest of the federal government should not diminish its obligations and fiduciary responsibility to tribes. We appreciate your efforts and your attempts to appropriate critical funding necessary to help meet the United States obligations. However, tribal governments need full funding and in parity with other federal programs. We fully support H.R. 1128, the Advanced Appropriations Bill, and thank you for putting that forward. We also thank the subcommittee for rejecting the administration's proposed cuts to the FY 2020 appropriation and for the increases you've proposed as outlined in more detail in my written testimony. What I'd like to articulate are some of our more specific asks. I ask that the committee, when developing appropriations language, truly consider the United States' unique relationships with tribes and how tribes are capable governments. Tribal sovereignty should not be subjugated to states by having to receive our federal funding through grants or set-asides administered by states, because many tribes never receive those funds. Funding should be dispersed to us through our compacting and contracting agreements, not through states or competitive grants, pitting tribes against each other for those desperately needed resources. Funding needs to be consistent and sustained. Our governments cannot create or run programs or services on small grants or inconsistent funding. Tribes, especially small tribes like mine, who have no economic development, rely completely on our federal funding, and last year's shutdown was devastating to us. Unlike states and municipalities, tribes do not have a tax base to supplement the cost of running our government's essential programs and services. If special language or authority is needed, then I ask that the committee consider including such language that allows the exercise of discretionary authority to fully fund us and includes as much flexibility as possible so we can develop our programs and services in a manner that best meets our unique and individual tribal nations' needs. Funding also needs to be timely. As a self-governance tribe for almost 2 decades, my tribe has not received our lump sum full annual payment required by law since 2001 or 2002. Finally, I ask that the committee include language in its appropriations accompanying report that directs the BIA and the IHS to explain the reasons that prevent their offices from complying with the statutory mandate, which requires the secretaries to award funds to tribes not later than 10 days after the apportionment of such funds by the Office of Management and Budget, and that the departments identify remedies to overcome these challenges, including any required funding to implement such changes. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Please, sir. Do you have your-
Thank you, Chairwoman.
Might
McCall.
want to pull that a little closer.
Okay.
Thank you.
And your committee for allowing me to speak here for the Fort Peck tribes. I am Floyd Azure. I'm the chairman of the Assiniboine and Sioux tribes of the Fort Peck Reservation. We appreciate the subcommittee's continued commitment to addressing the substance abuse and consequential challenges that arise from this plague. When someone is suffering from addiction, it is not just the person who is impacted, it is the entire family, and for tribal communities, it is the entire tribe. The addictions our people are facing today, in the particular meth and heroin, are so much more destructive than alcohol, I am not sure we can survive another generation with our people locked in the grasp of the addiction of these drugs. Thus, I would like to take my time today to talk about the importance of supporting the Indian Health Service and the need to support the Indian Health Service capacity to collect from third-party payers like Medicaid, Medicare, and private insurance. At the Fort Peck Service Unit, the increase in third-party collections from expanded Medicaid in Montana has allowed the Indian Health Service to actually provide health care rather than Band-Aids, which all too often were prescription painkillers. It is an old story across Indian country that the biggest drug dealer on the reservation is IHS Clinic. This is because the IHS historically did not have the resources to treat serious conditions like torn ACLs, rotator cuff injuries, or even gallbladder disease. Because these conditions are not life or limb conditions and would not qualify for PRC contract care, consequently the providers who were led to believe that painkillers would be a safe alternative to real care caused by drug and alcohol addiction, I am certain, wait no, I missed a page there. Prescribed painkillers, thus for the generation we have had to deal with people who were given pills and became addicts,
That's right.
which led to the destruction of lives, families, and in the end compromised the very foundation of our community and our future. However, since Medicaid expansion, the numbers tell us that the people are getting real health care and their quality of life is improving, which means the quality of life for our children is improving. No longer are people being told that they are not sick enough to get quality health care and given a bottle of pills for pain. Specifically, we have had scores of hip and knee replacements and other orthopedic surgeries, and other preventive and screening health care includes substance abuse treatment. While there is no magic solution to combating the many issues that are caused by drug and alcohol addiction, I am certain that ensuring people have access to quality health care is a big part of the solution. As our people heal, we must work to heal our families, and that is why I'm here again, asking for additional funding for our Tribal Social Services Program. Over 36% of the children in foster care system in Montana are Indian children. Indian people represent only 10% of the state population. More than 100 Fort Peck children are in the foster care system today. Montana is one of the 6 states in the country to have instituted an ICWA court. The court handles state ICWA cases in Yellowstone County from the Fort Peck, Northern Cheyenne, and Crow tribes. The team approach of the ICWA court in Montana fosters collaboration between the state and tribal stakeholders, promotes meaningful state compliance with the Child Indian Welfare Act, and improves outcomes of Indian children and their families involved in the foster care system. This kind of support and dedicated staff can only continue with additional funding for the BIA Tribal Social Services and the ICWA programs. Relatedly, while we appreciate increased funding for tribal courts that Congress has provided, it has not been enough. Tribal courts are the backbone of tribal sovereignty. Without sound tribal courts, we would not be a community where people feel safe, where businesses want to open, and where our children are the most vulnerable receive protection. Currently, the Bureau of Indian Affairs only provides a fraction of the funding to operate our tribal court. Our court is one of the few tribal courts in the country exercising expanded VAWA jurisdiction. This work is important to making our reservation a safe place for women and children. However, it takes additional resources to retain legal trained defense counsel, prosecutors, and judges. Finally, my tribes and others are resisting the construction of the Keystone Pipeline that will cross the Missouri River, just 1/4 mile from the western boundary of the Fort Peck Reservation. This project presents a grave threat to the land and the water resources of the Fort Peck tribes. Thus, while we remain hopeful that the legal process will stop this pipeline from becoming a reality, we fear we will lose and my community will be left to deal with the consequences of this pipeline. We are worried about the man camps that will be built and the increased burden on our law enforcement and social services programs. As a result, we know too well about the impact that the Bakken boom had on our community, with increased drugs and violence and the introduction of modern human trafficking. We believe most of the increased activity to the company's man camps. We ask Congress to provide us with additional resources to be able to address these impacts if Keystone is built. Thank you.
Sorry. It's okay. Well, good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. I'm Ron Allen, Chair and CEO for the Jamestown S'Klallam Tribe, located in western Washington State. It's always an honor to come here and advocate, not just for my tribe, but for many issues that I'm very familiar with Indian country. I have many hats that I participated in on behalf of Indian Country, and one of them is the co-chair of the TBIC, and I think the TBIC is for the BIA is going to be testifying. If not, I'm going to highlight some points. It's often tempting to look down at my colleagues and say ditto. Because, and I'm sure you hear that regularly throughout the 2 days of hearings, testimony from the tribes. We want to thank you, Congressman Kilmer, with regard to updating the civil rights crises, broken promises. Without a doubt, it should be a roadmap for the committee and for Congress with regard to the needs of Indian country. I have been involved for many years advocating for budgets for across the board, IHS, BIA, HUD, and transportation, and on down the line. And we are well aware that as a result of the original crisis report, and we forced OMB to give us an update on what's the numbers available for Indian country. So we know that there's probably 21 billion available for Indian country across all Indian programs. That's not enough. So we can tell you just by some analysis that we've done on some of the programs, the need of Indian country is probably north of 200 billion. That's a big gap. So how do we do that? How do we fill that gap? And the gap really is about how you can help us empower tribes to become more self-reliant the way we were historically, but being self-reliant here in the 21st century. So that's a huge issue for us in terms of how we're going to move that agenda forward and how we're going to try to advance Indian country's agenda. So I'm advocating also for the 105 budget. We know that in 2020 that there's a good number in there for the 105 leases. And I just want to underscore the point that we can't wait for the federal government to deal with schools and incarceration facilities and clinics and the other kinds of facility needs we need, or upgrading of any of those facilities that carry out federal functions. So we have to go out and build them ourselves, borrow money to make it happen. So that program is a way to help us get to effective programs and effective facilities that carry out these federal functions. So that is a huge deal. We want to underscore to you and your committee the need for your support for the advanced funding. These CRs are a pain, and they really are a pain and shutdowns for Indian country. So in the same way that you recognize the importance of veterans, we want you to recognize the unique, important relationship with the Indian country. The number is not that big when you're thinking about the $1+ trillion budget that the federal government deals with in order to get those resources out to the tribes. And many of our sister tribes just don't have the resources to lean on to carry out their federal functions. So that is a huge issue that we want to advocate. The base funding for the BIA is going to be a big issue for us, and so we're continuing to advocate. We continue to encourage you to make sure that you don't let them zero out HIP programs, general assistance type programs, things that they just constantly put on chopping blocks that actually serve our people and the economically disadvantaged. So that's a huge issue for us. Infrastructure is a huge issue, and with the BIA program, primarily you're dealing with road maintenance. Road maintenance is, it's well over a $300 million queue list that's sitting out there, and those Indian roads out there need help. And we know you've been bumping it up, but we're still losing ground. I just want you to know we're losing ground. If we show you the inventory updated, it will show you that what's going on here. It's just basically those roads and infrastructure is essential, whether it's healthcare, getting the kids to school, and so forth, that they have safe programs. I want to emphasize my point about the gap, the bridging of the gap of the 20 billion to 200+ billion is economic development. So whether we're enhancing economic infrastructure, but also loan guarantee programs, surety guarantee programs, that's how you can help tribes, get the businesses off the ground, generate unrestricted revenues for tribes to become more successful themselves, develop their own unrestricted revenues in order to fill that gap of the need of our communities. Last but not least, I just want to underscore, I'm from the Northwest, where natural resources is a big issue for us. I serve on the U.S.-Canada Pacific Salmon Treaty. We have resources that we need in order to deal with that. You bumped it up this year. We appreciate that, but it's a very complicated process between us, Alaska, and Canada to get our salmon back to a healthy state. So I will close with the urging of the recognition that you did help some programs in Alaska with regard to that matter, but we also need help with the tribes in our programs, our rivers, our stocks that are very important to us in Washington State and in Oregon. So with that, I thank you and look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Mr. Stewart, do you have a question at this time?
No, I'm sorry I missed it, and just would thank the chairwoman and the members for being here.
We can repeat it for you.
I'm sure Mr. Amade will fill him in on the floor. Chairman Zicke, I've got a question for you. I think I know the answer. You spoke of opioids and other things, but we're hearing, we heard it in testimony today. I've heard it from other tribal members that meth is making a comeback. And with that, on top of the opioids epidemic, and congratulations for saving as many lives as you have, meth also brings other problems with pollution, sometimes losing a house and other things like that. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, you're correct on your statement regarding the drugs, because we got one of the largest lakes in Lake Superior is Red Lake, and then, yes, because we have fishermen out in our lake, and it does pollute our lake in somewhat, but we deal with it because our law enforcement is in all the different programs we have. This Tawahi program for our youths, and it's called. We have this Children Healing Center to advocate for our kids to be reunite with their families, and as you are aware, we do a lot, but what we're requesting that this program expanded to other tribes, and the pilot tribes be kept where they're at, and the funds, because these helps families to understand the teachings that they're being given by this healing center, what the effects are on the drugs that are being out there in our reservations. And not just Red Lake, it's throughout Indian country. Even our surrounding communities are like that. They have the same problems.
It's true.
So we ask that you, here as the appropriation committee, to assist tribes on this endeavor to try to keep our families healthy, because we are now almost complete building our treatment center, which is because that's what you need to do, is to heal our people, to understand, to train them, to treat them, so they can have healthy lives and get their families together and have appropriate jobs and all that. Because like you say, even if it hits the ground, the drugs, sure, that trickles down to the water and rivers and et cetera.
All that. So you mentioned fire stations and fire halls, and we were talking about climate change, and we heard from some of the tribes that were dependent upon timber harvest for economic development, about what's happening with climate change and the threat of fire, and in part because of invasive species and drought and that. So how close is the nearest fire station if you don't have good fire halls? This is the first time, I think, that I can remember in testimony anybody talking about it. You think about how isolated tribal areas are and some of the situations you're in, especially in the Northwest and in the Midwest. You have two fire stations for the whole reservation?
Yes, we have 4 districts. We have Panema, Redby, Red Lake, Riverwalk. We're a large base tribe. We have members that live throughout our reservation. So we have a fire hall in Panema, and we had an old fire hall that was under Bureau of Indian Affairs, and we had to borrow money to build our own fire halls. Right there is the trust responsibility of federal government. We did ask, but there was no funds available, so we built one in Red Lake because the other one was contaminated, or it was because it was falling apart, roofs were falling apart, so we had to borrow money from USDA to build these fire halls, plus fire trucks.
So that funding comes from USDA.
Yeah, a loan,
It's a loan,
plus
okay,
we had some grant funds and
okay. You've given me food, more food for thought, talking about fire halls when we talk
so
about public
that's why we
safety.
went through that lease agreement,
Yeah,
so we can pay for the loan.
yeah,
It's a very
small line item
in the budget for fire protection.
yeah. But you know, you see things sometimes in the budget until somebody says something and all of a sudden a light goes off and it's like, okay, another area of underfunded.
Yeah, we only get
Promises.
47,000 a year for
Okay. I wanted to, you mentioned about you know, you're supposed to get the tribal award grants in a timely fashion. I know when you're not getting them, about how long does it take it before you're seeing the
It really just depends on where the continuing resolutions are, but according to our self-governance compacts, we're supposed to get it October 1st. You know, so that we have our full year's funding in advance, so that we're able to really continue our programs and services. It has been years since we've gotten a lump sum, and it comes in incremental installments during the course of the year. And we've continuously asked at Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Office of Self-Governance, why they have it going from Treasury to Bureau to the region to self-governance to the region and then back to us. It does this crisscrossing, and we've discussed this at our self-governance meetings often, that it delays us. So for a group of tribes that is supposed to be mature status and receiving our monies right up front, we wind up by getting our monies even later than some of the contract tribes do because of the redundancy and how they allocate it out. And we're also left without the increases that are appropriated through this committee for, like even with the Tuahi increase in 2016, a majority of the self-governance tribes weren't even going to be receiving that money until the Asia office actually stepped in and required the Office of Self-Governance to work with the tribes to identify what those funds were when they actually had a line item 15, 20 years ago. So we're working on obsolete and incorrect information. And if you look at the funding on a lot of the self-governance tribes, there hasn't been increases because as Congress is appropriating it, if it's not specifically said, oftentimes the self-governance tribes get left out as a loop. So we don't receive those increases as we're supposed to. And it's been very difficult trying to unpack all of the way that it's been able to just kind of accumulate with confusion and
Wow.
failure for transparency, which is why we're asking for a report from BIA and IHS to show or demonstrate to you how come they're not able to fulfill their obligation as mandated by the statute.
Well, I hope the report shows how they can do it quicker. In just a few minutes remaining, Medicaid expansion came up, and that's in the Affordable Care Act, as long as permanent reauthorization for Indian healthcare and health services. So I know that we're all waiting to see what happens with that. So is there any of the panel that doesn't? I was just kind of doing the states in my head. I know we did the expansion in Minnesota. You don't have it?
Not Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. Oh, that's right. I remember your former governor. That's right. Yeah. You have it in Massachusetts, Montana, Washington. It makes a huge difference. So it makes a huge difference in being able to. And I'll just mention it. I'm gonna figure out more about if there's anything that can happen. You're the second person to bring up man camps with Keystone Pipeline. Having spent a lot of time in western North Dakota, eastern Montana, I know what happens with the oil bust booms and what happened with the man camps there. And for the tribes all of a sudden to be picking up an extra cost when Keystone's being put in because of all the jobs it was going to bring and all the money that was going to happen with the oil moving forward. And then you have a pipeline running through your property, and then you're paying, you're paying public safety dollars to keep the tribe safe. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm going to look into that a little more. Thank you all for your testimony. I appreciate it. Gwitch. Yeah. We've had a couple people up here with colds and throats.
Something in the hotel.
Yeah. So, gentlemen, we have a timer. It's set for 5 minutes. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, but your introduction will not count against your testimony. And when the light's yellow, that means you're at 4 minutes, and when it turns red, you're at 5. And so, if we could start with you, sir, introduce yourself, and then when you start your testimony, we will start recording. And the red button needs to be on in order for you to be recorded. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman McCollum. My name is Julian Bearrunner. I'm currently serving as the 43rd president for the Oglala Sioux tribe on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. Thank you. Again, Madam Chair, and members of the subcommittee, for the opportunity to testify in FY 2021 funding recommendations for the tribal government human services programs. In 1868, the United States agreed to the terms of the Fort Laramie Treaty, cementing this country's obligation to the Oglala Sioux tribe. While this should guarantee our well-being and the chronic underfunding of Indian country programs has taken a detrimental toll on our tribe and our members. Throughout the federal budget process, we can improve the safety of our community, strengthen families, and promote tribal health with this goal. I offer the following recommendations. Public school safety communities are safe when the roads are well maintained, law enforcement is supported, and detention and substance abuse treatment facilities are well resourced. Yet, public safety programs in Indian country are constantly and consistently underfunded. And the Oglala, we bear this burden. Tribal members must confront dangerous road conditions on a daily basis. Law enforcement is grossly understaffed. Detention facilities are deteriorating. Meanwhile, methamphetamine ravages our communities, and these issues undermine our safety and our self-sufficiency. I did declare us in a state of emergency due to the meth epidemic, and fell on the BIA and relied on them for additional law enforcement support. With this subcommittee support, our roads can become safe passages to work and school. Our law enforcement officers can respond quickly to public safety threats, and we can treat more people for drug addiction and safely detain those who break our laws. Accordingly, we urge Congress to increase funding for the BIA road maintenance and ensure funding for our tribal roads. We currently don't receive any funding for our tribal roads, only for the BIA roads. As well as for the tribal law enforcement and detention services, and to maintain funding for the tribal opioid response grants while expanding these grants to include other drugs other than just the opioids like methamphetamine. we also need to increase the funding for our tribal court systems. Our Supreme Court is hopefully underfunded. Families and children thrive when given the access to robust social services and adequate housing. While many Americans access these resources, my tribe must contend with high rates of infant mortality, limited to the non-existent economic development, and extreme housing shortages. Yet these challenges are not insurmountable when we promote the personal development of tribal citizens and provide safe and stable living environments for Indian children and families and communities can flourish. A lot of our communities, and I want to thank you for coming out to our reservation, Madam Chair. And some of these roads are almost non-existent, and for the Oglala Sioux tribe, I mean it's become, we are, I think, severely underfunded when it comes to roads, and that's why I chose to come here today and ask and share some of our information with our roads, because some of these communities are, it was once paved and now it's just it's like craters hit the road, and we have school buses, our ambulances are on these roads, and we're still waiting on FEMA funding from our emergency from the last year, and for us to have so many miles of road, I believe 516 miles of BI road and approximately 1,900 miles of tribal roads. And like I said, we don't get no funding for the tribal roads, where it falls on the tribe itself to provide maintenance, and it just it's really detrimental to the people. And then it creates such an obstacle for our law enforcement and our ambulances. Our ambulances already being mileaged out so quickly because of the distance between the hospital and in the wherever they receive their medical calls at. But I just these are just some of the things that we face every day in Indian country, and especially for not only the Oglala Sioux tribe but the Great Plains. We are it seems like nobody knows that we exist. Yes, ma'am. I appreciate that. But anything that we can, that you all can do to help. It's just these roads have been like this since I was a child. And still, and they just continue to deteriorate. And a lot of them are gravel road. And our dialysis patients live on these roads. Our elders live on these roads, and especially during a storm, it's very hard and it's very critical for them to receive the care and report to dialysis. It's just a tremendous, and it just continues to pile up and create more and more problems.
Thank you, and you have very comprehensive testimony that's been entered into the record. Thank you. Sir?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair McCollum, Rep. Stewart, Representative Stewart, tribal leaders. My name is Jonathan Nez. I am the president of the Great Navajo Nation, and I'm also joined today by my wife, the First Lady of the Navajo Nation, Fifilia Nez. Also members of our lawmaking body, Delegate and Chairman Oto So, Raymond Smith, and Pernell Halona. In addition, we have cabinet members of our administration and our staff here today. We appreciate this opportunity to testify on the Navajo Nation's funding priorities and needs in fiscal year 2021. And it can take more than 5 minutes to let you know our priorities, but we appreciate the opportunity to be before the committee. Funding allocations to Indian programs must consider the commitments the United States government made, United States government made when they entered into treaties with Indian Nation. And as you know, Madam Chair, to this day, we have tribal nations have honored and respected this sacred agreement. American Indians serve in the U.S. military in greater numbers than any other ethnic group. And I need to remind the U.S. government of that. Our Navajo warriors are the biggest percentage to volunteer among American Indians today. In the interest of time, I would like to focus my testimony on the importance of transportation and infrastructure and the related needs of the Navajo Nation. And there's a lot of commonalities with other tribes that have testified before you. I will then highlight other Navajo Nation's appropriation priorities, all of which can be found in more detail in my written testimony. In regards to transportation and infrastructure, the Navajo Nation, as the largest land-based Native American tribe in the country, 27,000 square miles, has more than 11,200 miles of roads, with over 9,500 miles remaining unpaved. Additionally, there are 179 bridges on the Navajo Nation. 38 are eligible for rehabilitation and 28 are eligible for replacement. The Navajo Nation transportation officials estimate that it would take 116 years and $7.9 billion to meet current transportation infrastructure needs. It costs the Navajo Nation nearly $3 million to pave 1 mile of new road, and a lot of the material has to be brought in off our nation. Funds appropriated each year only allows the Navajo Nation to build 12.2 miles of new roads annually. The Navajo Nation's roads are lifelines and provide critical thoroughfare for school buses, public safety services, emergency responders, as well as access to governmental and public services, shopping and utilities. It is imperative that the Navajo Nation is appropriated funding for investment in maintenance and infrastructure of on-reservation highway roads and bridges. And I think my brothers and sisters throughout the country, tribal nations, are looking forward to the infrastructure bill. Education and scholarship. The Navajo Nation commends this subcommittee in Congress on authorizing an independent budget for the BIE. Many BIE schools are in severe need of upgrades and replacements, so we hope to see an increase in the line item. We also request $51.5 million for the academic year in order to provide scholarships to our nearly 16,000 scholarship applications. And you know that was taken out of the budget as well, President's budget. Healthcare. The IHS has a federal trust responsibility to provide access to healthcare and health services for American Indian and Alaska Natives patients, which also includes funding. The Navajo Nation has declared war on diabetes. The Special Diabetes Program for Indians is a beacon of hope in a federal tribal health care system that struggles in the shadow of federal funding shortfalls. The Navajo Nation respectfully requests the SDPI receive a permanent reauthorization in the amount of $200 million per year. In terms of abandoned uranium mine cleanup, according to the U.S. EPA, there are approximately 524 abandoned uranium mine sites on the Navajo Nation, with only 219 of those sites have available funds for cleanup and remediation efforts. That leaves 305 sites unaddressed. The Navajo Nation estimates it will cost $4 to $5 billion to address the remaining 305 sites, which doesn't include the cost of long-term monitoring and maintenance of areas where hazardous waste may be contained in a disposal cell. The federal government is responsible for funding the cleanup of the remaining sites. Therefore, we urge Congress to appropriate funds to develop a comprehensive cleanup plan and funding package to remediate the remaining sites. Navajo Indian Irrigation Project. The Navajo Nation established NAPI to operate the Navajo Indian Irrigation Project to manage the nation's industrial agribusiness, to build a profitable commercial enterprise, provide jobs and training for Navajo people, and to expand markets for NAPI's products. Navajo Nation respectfully requests that the subcommittee consider fully funding NIIP's operation and maintenance expenses in fiscal year 2021 and beyond. Increase the funding for Indian irrigation projects and the Water Infrastructure Improvement for the Nation Act from $10 million annually to $35 million, and increase the funding level for Resources Management Construction Fund. We request that NIP, as we call it, receives $4 million from this fund in FY 2021. In conclusion, the priorities outlined by the nation seek to strengthen the sacred trust relationship and assist the Navajo Nation's furtherance of self-determination and tribal sovereignty. These programs provide critical services to the Navajo Nation members and to our communities in Indian country. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. And again, we invite you out to the Navajo Nation once again. I know a few years ago you and committee members joined us on the Navajo Nation, and we welcome you to see what has been done, and little has been done since your last visit. Thank you.
So many reservations and so little time. So,
And
Mr.
so less
President.
minutes, too.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairwoman McCollum, members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify on the FY 2021 Interior Appropriations. My name is Martin Harvier. I am the president of the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community located in the metropolitan Phoenix area in Arizona. From healthcare, transportation to law enforcement, annual funding provided to our community is vital to the day-to-day operations of many programs. Although I will focus on just a few items for this testimony, it is fair to say the federal government must increase funding for nearly every Indian program to fulfill its trust responsibility. First, as a matter of policy and practice, our community believes in self-governance. We fully endorse the philosophy of removing federal bureaucracy from tribal programs to allow tribes to directly use federal funding in the most efficient manner to meet the tribal needs. Congress must ensure that IHS implements self-government agreements in a way that is consistent with federal law. Second, federal tribal transportation programs are woefully underfunded. For example, on an annual basis, our community receives $92,000 from the BIA for road maintenance. This represents 6.5% of total need. As a result, we must supplement federal funding with nearly $1.4 million each year. Put another way, we receive only $1,300 per mile per year to maintain BIA roads. Even according to the BIA, they estimate an annual cost of $10,000 per mile per year. And however, according to our own staff, the true cost exceeds $11,000 per year per mile. In total, according to the BIA's own estimate, our annual road maintenance need for our community is $720,000. Separate from regular maintenance costs, if we look at the community's 5-year new construction plan, BIA funding will provide only 3% or $7 million of the overall budget. In short, we believe an increase in funds for tribal transportation programs will help tribes establish, maintain, and sustain these vital activities. We are hopeful the committee and the Congress will increase the level of funding to these programs. Madam Chair, I also want to make you aware of an issue we are having with the U.S. Forest Service. This issue will impact cultural resources on Forest Service lands that border our community. While many stakeholders work to solve an issue related to the management of wild horses, the Forest Service just informed us they are going to build a large fencing project. We believe this project will impact the cultural resources in the area, and we have formally requested the Forest Service to complete a full environmental review so that all impacts are studied and provide for reasonable options. We would ask the committee to support our efforts to protect cultural resources. In closing, Madam Chair, the community is excited to have recently broken ground on a large Phoenix Indian Medical Center Northeast Ambulatory Care Center. Working in partnership with the Indian Health Services, it is expected the construction of the facility will be completed by December 2021. First, I want to thank the Congress funding this important project because it will better serve the needs of our community and the tribal population throughout the Phoenix area. We will be working with IHS in the coming year to include the NEAC staffing package in the FY 2022 budget. We look forward to working with this committee to ensure the staffing package is executed in a timely manner. I want to thank the committee for working with Indian Country to fund critical BIA and IHS programs. Thank you for the time.
Good afternoon, Chairman McCollum and subcommittee members. It is my pleasure during my first trip to Washington, D.C. as Principal Chief to testify on behalf of the Muskogee Creek Nation. This committee and its members play a crucial role in upholding the United States trust, responsibility, and holding executive agencies accountable in the government relationship. The Muskogee Creek Nation and United States Congress have a relationship more than 200 years old, resulting from an exchange of millions of acres and removal from our southeastern homelands. Today, the Muskogee Nation is the fourth largest federally recognized tribe with nearly 90,000 tribal citizens across the nation, building on Muskogee cultural and traditional lifeways. Our modern government assumes responsibility to provide essential services such as health, public safety, social services, and natural resource management. Collectively, these efforts support and protect our citizens, bolster our historic institutions, protect Muskogee traditions. First, I want to thank the hard work and leadership of this committee to honor our historical relationship with the United States through continued support for advance appropriation. Without your commitment to these initiatives, tribal government will continue to face difficult decisions between filing short-term lapse in government funding and long-term investments for ongoing critically needed services across our communities. I hope that both chambers can come to agreement and pass advance appropriations soon to prevent future instability in federal funding owed to tribal nations. The nation takes seriously our responsibility to provide stability within the reservations for all our citizens. That is why Muskogee Creek Nation invests more than $5 million annually to support policing and patrol activities and fund investigative and special operation divisions. The Muskogee Creek Nation Light Horse Department offers resources and technical capacity that are leveraged by local, county, and state and federal law enforcement agencies to support regional drug enforcement, anti-trafficking, patrolling, and interagency investigations alike. Our investment is 7 times the funding available on a recurring basis from BIA, and our police officers work tirelessly to maximize the little funding we do receive. I hope this committee will consider additional recurring investment in tribal policing and investigation funding. Interagency cooperation will remain critically important as we work under our leadership to encourage the Senate to pass the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act that had bipartisan support in this chamber. This legislation and ongoing efforts to support missing and murdered Indigenous women initiatives are crucial to protecting our most important resources, our citizens. The nation makes every effort to support and assist citizens during their most difficult times. Muskogee Creek Nation provides tribal funding to citizens who experience natural disaster, high energy costs, and loss of employment. We also leverage funds from BIA Welfare Assistance Program to support citizens and their family during loss of loved ones. However, funding available for burial assistance remains wholly inadequate. The BIA funds do not cover a third of the amount needed for proper burial. And to make matters worse, the BIA funds do not last the entire fiscal year. This leaves the nation with no choice but to further subsidize federal funding. I ask that the committee fully fund the Welfare Assistance Program and encourage the agency to update the 1990 regulation to reflect tribal operations in the 21st century. Muskogee Creek Nation provides resources for citizens at all points in their lives, including those families who are not well positioned to appropriately support children. In FY 2020, Muskogee Creek Nation invested more than $2 million to provide equal services to Muskogee Creek Nation families and state and county governments. In FY 2019, our IGWA program provides service to more than 500 families and nearly 2,000 Indian children. The work these social services do on a day-to-day basis is critical to ensuring the safety and well-being of Muskogee Creek Nation youth and families. Additional resources are critically needed to increase the number of Indian foster families and homes and to focus on risk prevention earlier in the case process. Though citizens' needs are a top priority for me, I am equally committed to protecting our natural resources, existing lands, and sacred sites. Muskogee Creek Nation leveraged funding provided through the National Park Service to protect sacred sites across the nation. We appreciate the increase that this committee supported in FY 2020 and hope future investments are possible to continue the important work. Further, I hope this committee will consider the critical role Tribal Historic Preservation Office play and encourage agencies to suspend or conclude funding to those offices that fail to adequately protect sacred tribal sites. In its history, this committee has consistently supported tribal sovereignty and respected the unique government-to-government relationship tribes have with Congress. Thank you for the opportunity to provide Muskogee Creek Nation's funding priorities for FY 2021. I look forward to working with this committee and the appropriation processes moving forward. And I also want to acknowledge that the other tribal members, Second Chief Beaver, Speaker Hicks, and Second Speaker Proctor, as well as our Ambassador, Jonadab, and our family members as well. Thank you, and it's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Something that has happened in passage since we've been doing public witnesses talking about roads. And obviously the backlog has gotten worse and worse, and everybody's described it. Roads, from what I'm hearing, are really a public safety issue at this point. You mentioned, someone who's injured in an ambulance, kids going to and from school, so the school bus is safe, and then the wear and tear on the equipment, people going to dialysis back and forth and that. I'm going to I think everybody's made the case on it, so I'm not going to use one of my questions for that, but I think we need to have a conversation with the Transportation Committee and the authorizers about what we're going to do about America's roads, right? And make sure it's always including tribal roads as well. The other thing we heard too, along with the roads comes the equipment, and the equipment aren't considered life, health, and safety. So we know snow plows and graders and all those other kinds of things in I'm going to use the term our neck of the woods, but the plains too, where there aren't as many woods, can really be life or death. And that's even true in other parts of the country where with climate change now you're seeing these just snowfalls that just come out of nowhere, and it can take you 2-3 days to dig out of it, those of you who are not from that area. What I would like to ask, though, is the Forest Service, fencing wild horses. Mr. Stewart, who left, we've been working on wild horses, trying to humanely control. Our goal is to humanely control the population so it doesn't destroy the environment and the horses don't starve. So I'm going to look into this, because the solution was not dilution to start moving it, to start moving them around to other places and having something. So I want you to know you got my attention with the wild horses. A couple of things have come up with drinking water, and I just want to put on your radar screen. It's not going to be Mr. Joyce's and my intention, but the president cut the drinking water funds in his budget, as well as sewer and that. So that's something that this committee now has to come up with. We want to be taking more and more steps forward and not just standing still, but the president's budget wasn't helpful in that regard with, light at the end of the tunnel, that we were getting a signal that more investments were to be made in the country, especially for things that you folks have identified. So you've given me as I said to the other group, a lot of homework. So I want to thank you for your testimony, and everything's in the book, and it was a lot more than what you had the 5 minutes to do, and I want to acknowledge that. Thank you so much. This is where Kat. Yep. She says Kat or Kate. Oh, I didn't see you come in. I'm sorry. There's been so much movement down there. I knew Stuart had left. Good to see you again.
We're talking about transportation.
Yeah,
We're sitting in a lot of mud. There's a couple schools that have been missing a lot of days.
because they can't get the school buses. We are minus one person on this panel, and that is Chairman Kat Brittham with the Confederate Tribes of, I want to say it right, Umatilla Indian Reservation. The chairwoman's not here today because of the devastating flooding going on in Oregon, and I want to acknowledge that because people have been displaced. Livelihoods have been lost. It's a very serious issue. And climate change is having a real impact on households and, as I said, being evacuated. And even more seriously, we've learned the death of a tribal member. So we understand her absence. Our thoughts and prayers, and my prayers are with her and the tribe and all the people in that part of Oregon and Washington State that are just kind of dealing with climate change in a very devastating way. And her testimony will be entered into the record, but I just wanted to acknowledge that. So I'm going to just kind of go through the timer really quick. It's 5 minutes. But when the light goes yellow, there's 1 minute remaining. When it goes red, all 5 are gone. We would like you to please introduce yourself, but we will not count your introduction against your testimony. All your testimony will be entered into the record, so don't feel rushed if you don't get to everything, because there's so much to cover. So if we could start with you, please, sir. Yeah, the red button has to be on in order for it to be on. Thank
Okay.
you, Mr. Gray.
So I'm Gerald Gray. I'm chairman of the Little Shell Tribe. We're the newly 574th recognized tribe, and I want to thank all of you for your votes that helped pass us through our legislation through Congress.
Historic, first time testifying.
Yeah, here, definitely. For sure. Everybody introduce?
Go ahead.
Okay, so good afternoon, Chairwoman, McCollum, Ranking Member Joyce, and honorable members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify about the tribe's funding. With the enactment of our legislation, the Little Shell Tribe is now taking the first few steps of a new journey to fully restore our relationship with the federal government, rebuild our tribal government, create a tribal economy, provide services to our tribal citizens, and establish a land base. As we undertake this challenge, we keep in mind those who have passed on waiting for this day, as well as our future generations. As a newly restored tribe, we have numerous funding priorities. First, new tribes funding at the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The BIA's new tribes funding is intended to assist newly recognized tribes carry out the day-to-day responsibilities of establishing and operating tribal government. Once recognized, the tribe remains in the new tribes category for 3 fiscal years. This funding is critical for newly recognized tribes because it provides seed money to hire staff, purchase equipment, and begin developing procedures and law. The FI 2020 budget contains $1.28 million for new tribes under the BIA's Operation of Indian programs. This funding was to continue federal support for the 6 Virginia tribes recognized in January 2018. The Little Shell tribe requests that the subcommittee provide an increase in funding for new tribes in order to assist the tribe in operating our government. Knowing well the struggle that the Virginia tribes endured, we'd like to ensure their funding levels are not decreased as a result of our recognition. Second, the new tribes funding at the Indian Health Service. IHS New Tribes funding assists the agency in carrying out its mission to provide direct healthcare services to citizens of newly recognized tribes. The fiscal year 2020 spending deal contained $11.4 million for new tribes under IHS hospitals and health clinics category. That funding was to provide direct healthcare services to the 6 Virginia tribes. The Little Shell tribe requests that the subcommittee provide additional funding in order for the Indian Health Service to be able to provide services to the Little Shell tribal population of approximately 5,400 citizens. Once again, the tribe would like to ensure that the funding levels for Virginia tribes are not decreased as a result of our recognition. Next, funding for Indian Health Services care facilities construction. With long-term goal of establishing a tribal health clinic, the tribe would like to see an increase in funding for healthcare facilities construction. I recently met with IHS in Billings, Montana to discuss healthcare options for my people. The IHS staff were very helpful in discussing the tribe's status as a direct service tribe and outlining options that the tribe could pursue when providing healthcare to our people. However, when I asked the IHS if the IHS could construct a clinic for the tribe in Great Falls, Montana to serve our people, their answer was no. IHS informed me that there's a list for replacement facilities that it must follow when constructing new facilities. Unfortunately, from what I understand, it could be generations before the Little Shell tribe would be eligible under the list for funding because the list is so long and the funding is so limited. The IHS said I would need to take my plea to Congress, so here I am. I am hopeful that something can be done to provide my tribe with funds to construct a clinic. Finally, funding for BIA and BIE construction. I've had a lot of meetings over the past month since my tribe's recognition was restored, and I appreciate our federal partners' proactive outreach and offers to assist us. One of the things that I learned through these meetings is that facility construction funding for schools, government facilities, public safety complexes, and similar buildings is very sparse. Most of the facility construction dollars are tied to a priority list, none of which the Little Shell appears on. The tribe does not want to take funding away from other tribes or to jump over those that have waited on the priority list, but there should be some sort of funding directed for newly recognized tribes so that they can construct the essential government building that they need to support services. I appreciate the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Please go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, my name is Brandon Maui, councilman from the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, and I am accompanied. Yep. Okay. And with me, I have to my right Councilwoman Avis Little Eagle, and right directly behind me, Councilwoman Nola Taken Alive. Ranking member, Madam Chairperson McCollum, Ranking Member Joyce, thank you for this opportunity. I'm honored to present this testimony here concerning the President's 2021 budget. I'd like to express our appreciation for the strong support of Indian tribes of this committee. The administration's proposed budget for FY21 came out on Monday. It would do great harm to the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe by cutting federal social service and other core programs that we contract from the BIA. And I'm here today to ask you to increase those funds. Our reservation encompasses 2.3 million acres in North and South Dakota. The reservation's population of some 8,500 tribal members and 2,000 non-members reside in 8 districts and in smaller communities. Our main industries are cattle ranching and farming. The tribe struggles to provide core services to our members, and we work hard to provide jobs and to improve the standard of living on the reservation. But we need a strong federal presence. The appropriations by this subcommittee spell the difference between the success or failure of our tribal programs. Today, my focus is on the tribe's children, our most precious resource. And in North Dakota, Indian children make up about 40% of the children in foster care. In South Dakota, Indian children make up about 50% of the children in foster care. And according to the Department of Justice, Indians have the highest rate of victimization in the country. The statistics tell us a powerful story. Our families are in crisis. And if our families are in crisis, our children are in crisis. And this means we are not breaking the cycle of trauma and abuse, but we're perpetuating it. And because of the continuing addiction to drugs like meth and heroin, violence and crime in our community is escalating. We're raising a generation of children at risk and without increasing federal support to provide more social workers, caseworkers, law enforcement officers, and teachers, and provide them with a community stability, their futures will be far worse than mine. I appreciate and encourage Congress's support for the Tiawahe initiative. According to the recent OIG report, the program is designed to support child welfare and family stability and to promote an integrated approach to addressing the interrelated problems of poverty, violence, and substance abuse in tribal communities. Tiawahe is intended to expand social services and similar programs to address children and family welfare, job training, and incarceration issues. And this is the kind of initiative that tribes have been demanding for decades. But unfortunately, according to the OIG, the BIA has failed to properly distribute the funding for this life-saving initiative. The tribe should have long ago received $54,000 in additional social service funding for 2019 and an additional $23,000 for ICWA funding for this initiative. We learned only Monday that the funds are available for us to draw down, and we are now 5 months into FY 2020 and we have not received any of the 20 funds for these 2 critical programs. As a result of long delays in funding, our tribal social service programs are in crisis. The tribes has done what it can do to sustain child social services, but with nearly $1 million shortfall, the tribe must consider returning or retroceding this program to the BIA. This would be a step backwards in self-determination, and we need additional funds to take care of the most vulnerable in society, our children. Our tribe learned the hard way that sexual abuse and alcohol and substance abuse are leading predicates to youth suicide. We learned this only after a cluster of 7 suicides occurred among our children a decade ago. We learned that they did not feel loved, respected, or safe. And when they do not feel loved or safe, they self-medicated, and tragically, in some cases, they hurt themselves and took their own lives. I don't want to bury any more children, but we want to celebrate them. Our ICWA office, which handles foster care placements off the reservation, is staffed by 1 person. She has 92 open cases in 18 different states, totaling 172 Standing Rock children in foster care across the nation. Our 92 cases represent less than 10% of the cases, and we are notified about. This means the tribe has to decline to intervene in 90% of the cases where our children are being placed into foster care systems. ICWA lacks sufficient funding, and I ask Congress to provide additional support to tribes so that we can uphold our obligation to our children. With that, I thank you for your time.
Chairwoman McCollum and members of the committee. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to testify before the committee today. Inanane Tilford Denver, Payugudu Dua, Payuhanataway. I'm Vice Chairman of the Bishop Paiute Tribe. I'd also like to recognize my Councilman Brian Poncho, who's with me today. We are located in the foot of the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains in California's Owens Valley. The Bishop Paiute tribe faces a unique set of challenges. With more than 2,100 tribal members, the Bishop Paiute tribe is the 5th largest tribe in the state of California. Our reservation encompasses less than 1 mile of land. The majority of the tribe already developed with housing and government footprint on it. The tribe has historically used and currently seeking out a number of federal grants and loan guarantees to provide services to our people. The ICDG-BG funding, we're particularly proud of our comprehensive elders program that supports elders living on the Bishop Paiute Reservation. Our tribal elders program offers nutrition support, a caregiver support program, and countless other supportive services for our tribal elders. I am honored to say that the current population of 396 elders is the largest elder population the tribe has ever had. Unfortunately, our existing elder facility is struggling to accommodate the growing population. To address this, the Bishop Paiute tribe has submitted a ICDBG grant to upgrade the current elders building. If funded, this grant will allow us to make dozens of improvements to the facility and further support our elders. I respectfully request the Congress provide robust funding for this program so that meritorious applications like ours all across Indian country can be fully funded. I would also like to talk about the criminal justice funding. The Bishop Paiute tribe also requests the committee direct the Bureau of Indian Affairs to provide equitable law enforcement and tribal court funding to tribal governments and to Public Law 280 states. As you know, Public Law 280 takes primary criminal jurisdiction away from the federal government and gives to the state law enforcement agencies in California, Minnesota, Nebraska, Oregon, Wisconsin, and Alaska. Notwithstanding the limited federal jurisdiction, our people still are entitled to a functional law enforcement and judicial system. Insufficient funding and support has led to significant miscarriage of justice for our tribal members and tribal police officers. To address this, the Bureau must allocate more robust funding under the operation of Indian programs, public safety, and justice account to strengthen these services to PL 280 states. And my final issue is fair market rent for tribal TANF facilities. Lastly, I would like to once again draw the committee and Congress' attention to an injustice our tribes continue to struggle with: the inability for tribes to recoup fair market rent for TANF facilities on reservation lands. As I mentioned, our tribe's land base is woefully inadequate to support our tribal membership. Many tribal members who want to live on the reservation are unable to do so. Still, the tribe chose to provide facilities and land in the center of our reservation for tribal TANF services and headquarters because we wanted to make it easy as possible for our tribal members to access these critical services. Unfortunately, a contradiction of how every other program operates under Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, HHS has interpreted tribal TANF statute to prevent us from recouping fair market rent for the facilities and lands used by the program. We do not believe that Congress intended for this. In fact, the underlying statute explicitly provides that HHS to regulate rent like other self-determination programs such as IHS. Instead, HHS flawed interpretation forces tribes with limited land bases and economic opportunity to locate TANF facilities off reservation and far removed from target populations. Several years ago, Congress included report language directing HHS to work with tribes to resolve this issue. Despite this, HHS has demonstrated a continued unwillingness to consider a more sensible interpretation of statute. The Bishop Paiute tribe will continue working with the Authorization Committee, the administration, and the committee to address this issue. In conclusion, I would like to thank you for listening to my testimony and for the committee to support tribal programs and opportunity for us to testify here today. We look forward to working together to address these critical issues across the Indian country. Thank you.
Mr. Joyce?
No, but I would like to thank you all for being here today and your testimony before this committee. It helps us come to make educated decisions on how we should proceed, so thank you.
Well, Chairman Gray, congratulations on being recognized, but now you're recognizing a whole lot of challenges in getting some of the programs that you went up and funding. It has been a while since we've had one of our tribal nations come forward and talk about the challenges that you're facing, that you're presenting. So that gives Mr. Joyce a lot to think about along with me about how we try to fully embrace your sovereignty, recognize it, including the benefits that you're entitled to under treaty obligations. So thank you for sharing that. And we are going to see what we can do. Talked about line items and that. I appreciate you saying that you don't want to take away anything from any of the other tribes. So we have to figure out a way to try to make everybody a little more whole. So thank you for that. And talk to the Senate about that too. I hope you're having conversations with our Senate colleagues.
Yep.
Because sometimes we have great ideas and we go to conference committee and the Senate hasn't thought of them. So thank you for that. We've had a couple of panels talk about children and ending the cycle of violence. And if kids don't feel loved and supported, they don't do well in school. And it's just it can create a downward spiral. So you spoke very eloquently about that. Is there, I'm not asking you to pick one thing, but what might be the 2 or 3 things that you think this committee should be focused on? And I heard fully what you said about Tawahi. I'm a big fan of it, and I helped to work to get it started. Would it be that, or?
Yes, and right now, Child Protection Services, it's not sufficiently funded right now, and the reality, and you've heard on panels before is that the root of a lot of these problems are the drug problems in communities. As you know, the drug problems throughout the system is affecting especially our children. And one way that we can continue to battle that back on Standing Rock is we don't have to utilize as much resources by in the CPS area. We're already understaffed, severely understaffed, and by sufficiently funding that, it's something that we can hopefully take other resources and focus on what's the root of the problem. How can we funnel these other resources to that, such as drug problems or what have you. And so that's something that, in the testimony we wanted to be sure to emphasize is that Child Protection Services, social workers, case managers, all of these areas is something that we need to focus on because it ultimately affects the children on all reservations.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, Tawahi looks at a whole of community, whole of family approach, and because it's intergenerational trauma, right? So, what was the number again? 92 cases the social worker had?
Yes, it was 92 open cases. The ICWA office had open cases. The CPS, those numbers are a lot higher per case manager. I know one case manager was working on 170 around their cases that they were constantly trying to push through, and that's, keep in mind, we were both in North and South Dakota,
Right.
so
you have to deal with both jurisdictions.
Two case workers may be on one side, and two case workers on the other side, and to try to get through that many cases is nearly impossible. We're allowing our children to fall through the cracks, and that's something that we can't continue to do.
I mean, the caseworkers have too much
Correct.
on their plate. So first I want to recognize that before I say the following. Do North and South Dakota, because you're dealing with state laws and if you're dealing with out-of-reservation placement and that, do they work are they allowed to work together? Because your reservation is a reservation. You're one
Right.
whole nation that straddles two state jurisdictions.
Right.
Do you feel that adds to the problem, or have the states and the federal government work through that? That's not part of the problem.
We are moving forward in working closer with the state, especially I know North Dakota through Title 4E is something that we're trying to move forward to make sure that all the children are taken care of. South Dakota, same thing. It's a work in progress. We're trying to work through that. It's just that the bureaucratic stuff it gets to be frustrating, and I know both council people here with me today have backgrounds that worked with the children and can also testify how frustrating that is to try to get to a point where we can work together as one unit, I guess, in a partnership with both
Right.
federal and state. And it's just something that it's constantly roadblock after roadblock.
So you have an appropriations problem,
Right.
but you also have a bureaucratic problem too
Yes.
that might be better addressed by our colleagues in the authorizing committee. So we'll follow through with them with the testimony and make sure that they have your contact information. Sometimes you just need to get everybody at the table and say who's going to take lead. Sometimes no one's willing to do that. Sometimes somebody stands up and says they're willing to do that. So thank you.
Thank you.
So both Janet and I wrote down the HHS issue that you brought up, because that's not our jurisdiction, but we'll be looking into it. And then, you mentioned senior housing. Because some states, some tribal nations, some countries, their populations are shifting where it's more elder and not a lot of youth. Do you have the situation of both youth and elder, or are you facing more of an elder population explosion?
It's the elder population explosion. And again, our current facility that the elders, we serve all our meals out of, it used to be a youth treatment center, but because we were unable to acquire funds to continue operation of that, we moved our elders into that facility. So we're serving over 300 meals out there, but the kitchen is so small. So we did put the grant in for expansion, because we feel we currently serve about 150 meals a day to shut-ins, and that way we get their nutrition out to them. Otherwise, we're in such a rural area, there's nothing there for them.
Well, that's really important if if somebody's recovering from surgery and that, to have a nutritious meal, and the diabetes issue and everything on reservations. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And our last panel, if they would please come up to the table.
Just slide everybody down.
So would you like me to go over how the timing works, or were you in the room before? I'm happy to do it. Everybody's okay? Everybody's good? Well, welcome, and Ms. Martin, how timely to have you kind of close up what we've heard about the children in Indian country, the children of the United States country too. So, Ms. Martin, if you'd please lead off.
That testimony was very moving. All right. So, good afternoon, Chairwoman McCollum, Ranking Member,
staff. My name is Aureen Martin. I'm a member of the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa in Wisconsin, and I'm a member of the National Indian Child Welfare Association Board of Directors. NIC was a national American Indian Alaska Native organization with over 25 years experience in policy development focused on Native children and families. Our mission is twofold. First, we address issues of child abuse and neglect through policy research, community, and policy development, and we support compliance with the Indian Child Welfare Act. Before I start, I'd like to going into my comments, I'd like to thank you for your bipartisan support of Native children's issues. Because of that, we've seen a lot of gains over the last year in particular on our issues. Two of those developments over the last year I just wanted to mention quickly before I go into my requests. First, I think after discussion with staff, it was clear that the Indian Child Protection and Family Violence Prevention Act, which we are huge believers in, needed to be reauthorized. And H.R. 4957, the Native American Child Protection Act, was introduced and it was referred to House Resources and passed out of committee. So that would reauthorize all those programs. And then, more importantly, thanks to you, the ICWA Off-Reservation Program was funded for the first time since 1996 with a $1 million allocation. So thank you for that. The Standing Rock testimony was very moving to me, and I'm kind of throwing away the rest of my comments because I'd like to talk a little bit about that. One thing I've testified about a few times is the Indian Child Protection and Family Violence Prevention Act. And that act has, it's very important because it created two things. One, it created mandatory reporting and background check requirements for people who deal with Native children at the federal level. But the other thing that it did was it provided for two programs which really don't appear, funding that doesn't appear anywhere else in the federal scheme, which is, one, it provided for prevention activities to help prevent Indian family violence. And the other thing it provided for was direct funding to tribes to treat victims of family violence, children. And those programs have never been funded. And after discussions with your staff last year, it was clear that we needed to reauthorize that act. And so it's our priority to get that, working in tandem with you, to get it reauthorized and get those programs funded. But I can't see how much time I have left, so I'm trying not to overstep. But the reason I wanted to concentrate on that today is that after hearing the testimony of the Standing Rock witness, sorry I don't recall his name, those programs dealing with the mental health issues of children who have been taken into custody, who are part of the system, that's so vitally important, because if you don't take care of them and they don't get to heal, then they become part of the system later on. And it perpetuates the cycle. So just providing for them to be in foster care isn't enough. You have to provide for their well-being and their ability to heal. And we think that the programs under the Indian Child Protection and Family Violence Prevention Act, they meld with what you have for the Tuahe Initiative, what you have for the Indian Child Welfare Program. They all create a system that supports children. So we are continuing to advocate for those programs to be funded, and fully funding those programs on an annual basis would be $43 million. And I'm happy to continue to talk with you and your staff about how that might work. The other programs that we're supporting are the ICWA funding for both on-reservation activities and the off-reservation activities. And as I said, we're hugely appreciative of the $1 million that you've appropriated. It's still to be seen how those funds might be dispersed or allocated. BIA is still working on that, but just having them out there for the first time in so many years is tremendously helpful. So we're asking for, and I think the prior witness made a much better case than I could about why they're necessary and why increased funding is necessary for those programs. I think the last point I'd like to make is that statistics tell us that prevention, early intervention, and treatment of childhood trauma saves not only lives but dollars, because children who experience violence are more likely to have problems and move into the system if these issues are unaddressed. So it's imperative that both tribes and off-reservation Indian child welfare programs receive funding to provide these services for children who are in need. So thank you for the opportunity to testify. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair McCollum and Ranking Member Joyce. My name's Melanie Forkiller. I'm with the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma, which is the third largest tribe in Oklahoma, in the nation. And we're located in the southeast 13 counties of Oklahoma. I bring greetings from Chief Gary Batten and Assistant Chief Jack Austin Jr. And we really appreciate the opportunity to be able to share budget priorities for 2021. First of all, I wanted to say and share our appreciation for your support of advance appropriations for both Indian Health Service and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It's very important that we be able to continue to operate uninterrupted, especially when we have such life and limb services often that get interrupted when appropriations don't come through. The second item I wanted to mention is to talk about the Special Diabetes Program for Indians. Unfortunately, we saw in the President's request that it seems that he's trying to phase that out over a 10-year period, and it just seems extraordinary to us given the health outcomes that are proven with this program. Even in HHS's own report, that 54% of end-stage renal disease has been reduced as a result of this program since 1996. It's just astounding to us that you would want to disrupt that kind of accomplishment. But rather, we'd like to see it permanently, obviously, authorized. And I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about workforce development as it goes to our Indian health programs. We have a hospital that's located in a very small community. It's 1,100 folks in southeast Oklahoma. And from there, we've got 8 outlying clinics across 13 counties. It's really difficult for us to attract and retain health professionals in such a small community because there just aren't amenities for docs and their families. The schools aren't large. There's not a lot to do out there. So it's really a challenge for us to be able to keep staff. And we use a number of tools to try to do that. We maintain low vacancy rates as compared to other Indian health facilities, and it takes a lot of work. A couple of the tools we use are graduate medical education programs, residency programs, as well as loan repayment programs and other types of things to be able to attract and retain those folks for a period, at least a period of time. And we typically, because we're a good employer, we can keep them longer than that. But graduate medical education, we started in 2010 through a grant from HRSA. It's a competitive grant. We've got to compete with the world, hospitals across the nation. And as far as I know, we're the only tribal location that's been successful in getting one. But that program has been the single most valuable tool to us. Most of those residents stay in rural Oklahoma, and of those, most of those stay within our health system. So it's been very incredibly valuable for us to grow and keep those health professionals in our system. So the problem there is that the funding's intermittent. It's competitive, it's not recurring, so to be able to build and sustain a program is really difficult. And we think this is a program that could be replicated in Indian country and provide that kind of support in rural areas, remote areas oftentimes, to get those health professionals there. So if we could talk about some kind of steady recurring funding in that area, that would be very helpful. We have a number of other priorities as well, but I just wanted to mention a couple of other things. One is the 105L lease situation. We did appreciate the President requesting an indefinite appropriation for that. We've been supportive of that, so we're hopeful that there'll be support as that moves forward. Unfortunately, it's been affecting services. Even though those inflationary increases didn't get distributed at all, so it was funding we never saw. Certainly, those inflationary increases were intended to go to health services. So we're hopeful that that will move forward. There are also a number of Bureau of Indian Affairs programs that are either eliminated or reduced in the president's request. A couple of them, like the Indian Loan Guaranteed Program, the Welfare Assistance Program, are being described as being duplicative, which is interesting because in the instance of welfare assistance, you have to exhaust every other resource before you're even eligible for welfare assistance, so how can it be duplicative? So many of these are unique and safety net programs that, you know, we certainly want to see restored as considerations on the budget move forward. So I know we have a number of other priorities that's in our written testimony. So with that, I appreciate again the opportunity to speak with you today, and I'd be happy to answer questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman McCullough, Ranking Member Joyce, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify on behalf of the Navajo Nation Council. I serve as the chairman of the Navajo Hopi Land Commission, and we are deeply appreciative of this subcommittee commitment in addressing the hardship and reflecting of the Navajo people during the relocation law and the 40-year-old long construction freeze. Please know that more than anyone, the Navajo Nation at the end, we don't want ONER to close. We want the funding to continue to move forth and Congress to continue to move those fundings to fund that program so that Navajo Hopi Land Office of Navajo Hopi Indian Relocation Program can continue to complete their mission in their job, which is imposed on the Navajo Hopi Land Settlement Act. So we want to make sure that Congress and the United States fulfill their obligation to make sure that the people that they relocated off the lands that was given to another tribe and move into communities of such communities of Flagstaff or Newlands or Tuba City within the Navajo Nation. And there was a commitment that was made to the Navajo people there. And the commitment is that we will relocate you and you will have jobs, you will have health benefits, you will have all these immensities because we relocated you. And out of this decision right now, the health aspect has really impacted the Navajo people there. And therefore, I really hope that for the committee to strongly urge and help and support the need for that office to continue to stay open. The other is that, the promise, you need to fulfill the promise. And with that, the Navajo Nation has initiated a plan called the Navajo Nation, or the Navajo Thaw Plan. With that, the Navajo Thaw Plan is addressing another aspect of land that had been put into dispute for more than 46 years. People living in that area that was impacted lived on 1.6 million acres of land that halted construction, economical opportunities for these families. And to this day, since the freeze has been lifted, the freeze has no dollars tied for the rehabilitation. Only countries overseas that you see that countries do not, countries oppress people. In this case, the Navajo people had been oppressed, and people had to move to a certain community in order to have water, in order to have electricity, in order to have the basic necessities of life, or try to meet that American dream. But yet, the land was frozen for 46 years economically. Where in the United States has that happened? And that happened on the Navajo Nation. To this day, right now, the rehabilitation of the former Bennett freeze is something that Congress needs to look at. And we need the help in social, economical, and even the health aspect, the cancer treatment and so forth, uranium issues. And we need help in those areas that will benefit the Navajo people. And we really hope that as federal appropriators, you do address those concerns. We are American citizens also. and we appreciate your help and try to help the Navajo Nation. And under the Navajo Hopi Indian relocation, you know, as it's reauthorized, we want to make sure that this office is you know, fulfill its duties, so that, you know, we can make sure that the need is and the mission is completed. And with the closure issue, we want tribal consultation. To this day right now, the federal government has not reached out to the Navajo Nation and say, hey, we're going to close right now. We need to talk. But right now, the Navajo Nation's position is that we are not supporting the closure due to the issue of the tribal consultation. Their job is not done, and we appreciate your help in that area to help complete the mission. With that, as funding moves forth, we want you to just help the Navajo Nation and try to help those Navajo people that have been affected by the land settlement case, and just hope that they can meet the American dream. That's all we want. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, Ranking Member Joyce, good afternoon, staff. Can you hear me now? As they say. I have two copies of an outline of my remarks, so I thought I would share that with Chairwoman McCollum and the Ranking Member Joyce. I'm here representing the National Tribal Contract Support Cost Coalition. The coalition represents about 260 tribes, including all of the tribes in Alaska through the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, down to the Choctaw Nation and the other great nations in Oklahoma, Chickasaw and Cherokee, as well as tribes in the Pacific Northwest and California. The coalition has been centrally involved in litigation involving contract support costs. I was privileged to be able to work on the Cherokee case at a time when Melanie Forkiller was there and a vital person in the success of that case before the Supreme Court. In the wake of that litigation, this committee did the single greatest thing you could have done to provide stability and predictability for contracting and compacting, and that was to establish an indefinite appropriation for contract support. Today, in theory, I'll talk about the practice in a moment. In theory, tribes know how much they're going to be getting from one year to the next, and they get it. The contract support cost appropriations. They know that they don't have to budget out of the programs in order to take care of their overhead, in order to pay for workers' compensation, in order to do procurements, in order to pay for their audits and their accounting services. They know that that money is going to be coming from the government thanks to the indefinite appropriation that you established in 2016. So thank you very much for the work that you did at that time. I cannot thank you enough for that improvement. And as I'll talk later, it's exactly why the same improvement is needed for the 105L leases. But we'll get to that in a moment. Necessarily, if somebody like I sitting here talking about the agencies, I'm going to sound critical, and I will sound a critical tone. But before I do that, I want to pay tribute to the Indian Health Service and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They are trying, and they have improved. They have each developed important new policies on contract support costs. Those policies are permanent in their manuals. If they're falling short, it's not for want of trying, and I do salute their efforts in this area. Certainly, the world is much improved today in 2020 than it was years ago, the years that brought along all of that litigation and caused so much pain for this committee along the way. First thing I want to mention is the payment delays. The payment delays at the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Office of Self-Governance in particular are daunting. I was talking over the last couple of weeks, my colleagues and I, to one of our tribes, the Chugach Regional Resource Commission. They had to get a loan, and they paid interest until the funding was just worked out a couple of days ago, and they're going to be able to retire the loan without a penalty because they were not getting their contract payments, including any contract support payments in 2020, and they still don't have all of their 2019 payments. There is an institutional problem in the Office of Self-Governance and in the BIA in getting those contract support cost payments out. They'll tell you that there's 18 or 20 steps that money and approvals have to move through in order for the money to actually get out the door. Reform is needed in this area. And with the committee's gentle nudging, perhaps a committee could be put together, a work group committee could be put together to try to get to the bottom of those impediments and eliminate them, certainly not by legislation, we'd hope. The second thing I wanted to talk about, and there are 4 items on contract support costs, is reporting. Reporting has been a problem. It's been a perennial problem. Last year, the Indian Health Service caught up on their reports for 2018, 2017, and 2016. So they were behind, but they caught up. The BIA, so far as we know, hasn't made a report since fiscal year 2014, 6 years behind. It's supposed to make a report by May 15 every year. That's in Section 106C of the Indian Self-Determination Act. They don't do it. I think there's nothing more one could do than have a law that commands that it be done by a date certain, but perhaps this committee can urge the agency to honor the obligations that it has under the law. The third issue is also a recurring issue. There was a lot of interaction with tribes up until those manuals were adopted. Tribal consultation is important, and it's effective. The manuals that IHS and BIA adopted reflect a lot of tribal input. It was wonderful. It was hard, but it was wonderful. Since then, we don't have annual meetings anymore unless there's an emergency, an urgent matter. There's been one face-to-face meeting with the Indian Health Service since their manual was adopted, and none since the BIA. So a gentle nudging of greater tribal consultation with the Tribal Federal Contract Support Cost Work Group would be much appreciated. The fourth issue is much more consequential, and it's financial, and so I do want to bring this to the committee's attention again. We have talked about this annually. It's probably the 5th year, maybe 6th year that we're raising this. The 7th proviso in your bill addresses substance abuse funding, domestic violence protection funding, suicide prevention funding. This funding is laid out in a separate proviso so that the IHS director can figure out how best to allocate it, and that's good. No complaints about that. You want the money to get where it's going to do the most good. But the IHS director in 2012 decided to stop paying that money once he decides how to allocate it, to stop paying it through compacts and contracts. And in that one gesture, that denied tribes the right to contract support costs. That one gesture required tribes to take money out of those funds to pay their overhead, which is fixed, which is set by the National Business Center. It cannot be changed. So we've asked repeatedly, the Indian Health Service has responded to you by studying the matter, getting tribal input. Turns out the consultation has led to no change whatsoever, despite the uniform view of the tribes that those funds should go through contracts and compacts. If the 7th proviso could be amended, we'd be most appreciative. The last thing I didn't address, may I, Madam Chair? Oh, you have to go to a vote?
We just had votes started.
Okay.
So, and we've got it. And
Okay.
And we know how to get a hold of you. And
Yes.
we know you talk to staff all the time,
Yes.
and you give us a lot of food for thought. So thank you for that. Mr. Joyce, I mean, we might have time for a quick question or two.
Don't want to hold everybody up.
Okay. So the good news is, we got this panel in before votes started, which did not happen yesterday, and people waited 45 minutes for us, and I just looked and we have 10 votes, so you would have been here till dinner, so that's the good news. Ms. Martin, we look forward to talking to you more as we develop the bill. Ms. Forkiller, I think what you were saying about HHS is something that we need to look into. Some of the tax provisions that you had have come up on some other things. So we will be formulating some letters and some ideas to share, Mr. Joyce and I with our colleagues on the Ways and Means Committee. And were you present when we brought Congress up? Yes, so Congress has worked hard to consult with Navajo and Hopi on the closure. And we do need to bring the program to an end, but we do need to follow the law when we do that. So thank you for, kind of highlighting how you're feeling about the communication with the act as they're moving to close it down. So we ask them for reports every so often. I think they're due to come in and give us a report shortly. So we will be sharing your concerns that there needs to be better consultation. And then we will follow up with you what we hear from them, both you and the Hopi. And then if you still have questions, we want you to pick up the phone, send an email. If you like snail mail, you can use that too. Let us know how you think it's going, and contact our offices. We take the fact that this needs to come to closure seriously, but it needs to follow the law. It needs to be done with consultation, and they're right there. They're not in Washington, D.C. They're right there, close to you, so there's no excuse for you not to feel like you're being consulted. And I hear what you're saying about the Benton freeze, which is a different but sidebar to what happened with the freeze on that. So thank you very much. So I want to thank you for being here. And with that, the public witness that we've had for the past 2 days with tribal leaders and leaders in the tribal ally community comes to a close. Thank you.